Welcome. I'm Radhika Subramaniam. I'm the director of the Sheila Johnson Design Center, which includes this gallery and our neighboring gallery up the ramp. And we're delighted to welcome all of you tonight to the book launch of Climate Change in Cities, which represents part of the programming and our focus this fall on climate change issues. So the space that you're sitting in, this gallery, the exhibition here, thank you. The exhibition here focuses itself on the linkage or the role that artists can play in climate change. And we're pleased to be reaching across divisions to collaborate with our colleagues in Milano to look at the other ways and other perspectives that have been brought to bear on climate change issues and to host this book launch here this evening. I do very much want to thank John Clinton, who's been an excellent and wonderful collaborator and is the moderator of our panel tonight, and Shagun Mehrotra, with whom we worked to bring this panel here this evening. We are having a few introductory remarks. This is an interdivisional experience, so I'm also exceedingly pleased to welcome not only Joel Towers, the Dean of Parsons, but also Neil Graboy, the Dean of the Milano School of Public Policy. Am I right? It's a longer title, but it's, welcome, Dean. Neil.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to see a crowd like this waiting to hear about climate change. Now, if we're looking at art or talking to one another, but this is fantastic. It really is fantastic, and I'm delighted to be able to play a role in at least introducing something about what we're now doing with a new program in environmental policy and sustainability management, which is being run by John Clinton. And this is our first semester offering the program to students, which is a real delight for us. It's also a delight to have Shagun Mehrotra as a new member of this particular program, and we are very much delighted that he has joined us to participate in a program that I think is going to be just a knockout and really important to the university. Just a couple of words about Shagun, and I have to say I had the good fortune to spend 2 breakfasts with you in the Upper West Side, which is a good place to go to breakfast if you want to know a specific place. And was so impressed with what he would bring to us. This was when we were, if you will, wooing. I haven't done wooing much in my life for the last 35 years. No, 55. In any case, it was a delight to be able to speak with him. Here is a man who's just recently gotten his PhD from Columbia, worked at the Earth Institute. I have, if anybody wants to see it, his 13-page CV. How a new PhD has a 13-page CV, I can't tell you. Mine was about half a page, if I was lucky. But he comes to us with 3 master's degrees, a certificate in architecture, having worked even on railroads, which just happens to be one of my grandson's specialties. So I think we're going to have to introduce Shagun to my grandson. But it's a real delight to welcome the whole panel. I know they'll be introduced separately, but to have in a very special space a conversation about climate. I am told by Joel that in fact architecture makes a difference, and that where we sit will have an effect on how we think about the world, and he will explain how it has some connection to how we think about climate. So welcome to everyone, and I introduce Joel Towers.
Thank you, Neil. Well, architecture is complicit. I don't know if we... it is a real pleasure to add my welcome to this distinguished panel, and to, in particular, because of this book. And I'll say a few words about it, but I've known several members of the panel, Bill and Cynthia, for many years, and Cynthia and I had the real pleasure of working together at Columbia when I was teaching there, architecture students, and I was reminded this evening of sending a group of architecture students out about a decade ago to the Newtown Creek and trying to help them understand that very particular landscape, and Cynthia was central to the ability to do that. At that time was working with a different geographer. David Harvey worked on that one with me. got to know Bill through the work that he and Cynthia had done on the Metro East Coast study, which I knew immediately upon reading it now 10 years ago? 10 years ago, was precisely the kind of information that was essential to designers if they were to undertake the responsibilities to participate in transforming the kind of influence and the physical environment that we design and build on a regular basis that has played a role in producing the kinds of challenges that we face today. This is the complicit part of it, is that the world that we have constructed in many ways has been constructed, designed to function in the way that it functions. That's not a very good assessment of the work that we've done, but it's also the very good news, which is that it could be designed differently. And it could be designed differently if we were looking at and understanding the kind of information as a base condition that Cynthia and Bill in that first book and the entire panel, well, you don't get to count in that, John, have produced in Cities and Climate Change, because this is really where the work is happening. And the work is happening today based on our ability to understand precisely the kind of human impacts that we are having on the environment and our ability to do things differently. And so I think the graduate program, and I'll say just a couple of words about what we're doing at New School that John is leading out, is a tremendous example, great example of what we're doing at New School, but it carries on a tradition in environmental studies. I'm looking around and I see Nevin Cohen sitting here, who has led out the undergraduate programs that we have had now in our third or fourth year. In environmental studies at both the Bachelor's of Science and Bachelor's of Art level. Timon McPherson as well, who's been working on those programs. We've made a real commitment here at New School, not just to steal Shagun from Columbia, which we were very happy to do, but to take as the core of what we are able to work on the intersection of the design, social science, and policy arena, and to interject with that the strong science base necessary to understand what we can do. And so we've gone out and built a faculty and programs precisely to engage with these core questions in urban environments. And so that this book comes along, it's kind of, this is required reading. Required reading means you should buy one of them over here. But it's required reading for anyone who cares about design. And so it's in fact entirely natural that we should be sitting in a great design school having this conversation, because that's where the conversations have to happen, at that intersection. And so I'm thrilled to have you all here. I want to say, I guess, a couple of official words of introduction of each of the panelists, but I don't want to take too much time reading through their bios, but I will do a little bit. John, as you know already, who will moderate the panel, is both chairing and running our Tishman Environment Design Center now. And Cynthia Rosenzweig from NASA Goddard Institute as a senior research scientist at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and she heads the Climate Impacts Group. She's organized and led large-scale interdisciplinary regional, national, and international studies of climate change impacts and adaptation. Oh, we had such a long conversation about adaptation a decade ago now, but this is precisely where things are. She's co-chair of the New York City Panel on Climate Change, a body of experts convened by the mayor to advise the city on adaptation for critical infrastructure issues, and I'm not going to go beyond that because it's very long and very distinguished. There's a whole bunch of IPCC work in there. And Shagun, you've already been introduced, so you don't get to happen twice. Bill Solecki, on Cynthia's left. Bill's research focuses on urban environmental change and urban spatial development. He's the director of CUNY's Institute for Sustainable Cities and has served on several U.S. National Research Councils committees, including the Special Committee on Problems in the Environment. He currently is a member of the International Geographical Union, Megacity Study Group, and the International Human Dimensions Program. And Bill, there's a lot more here as well, but I just want to highlight the MEC study because it was such an important body of work, really transformative, and Bill and Cynthia were co-editors of that. And then Steve, sorry, I'm going to turn the page. Steve Hammer from MIT focuses on energy policymaking, energy planning. In particular, in New York City, the long-term study on the history of energy policymaking in the city and policy changes that deliver more widespread deployment of clean energy technology around the city. And then on the regulatory side, the environment for microgrid systems, analysis of current state of regulation influencing the deployment of microgrid technology in the US. It's a remarkable group of individuals. It's a remarkable book. There's probably a joke, and if you get the four of you together and out at a bar, I'm sure this combination is something. But I will hand it over to John Clinton, and I thank you all for coming, and I'm sure you will have lots of great questions for this group.
Thanks, John. And so, yes, I actually would start with the observation that we're very grateful that you could all arrange your schedules to be here at the same time. I understand that doesn't happen very often, so thanks, and welcome to everyone. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Joel. We who have had a chance to read the book, and I'm one of them, I think are very impressed by this effort to bring together the physical sciences and the social sciences to try to bring information down to the local level so that cities, mayors, planners can address climate change issues in a way that is attentive to the kind of analysis that we find in this book. So we're going to hear from the panelists first in terms of the kinds of reflections that occur to them at this stage of their collaboration together. At the end of the evening, I hope we'll hear about what's coming in the future. But if we could perhaps just start with Steve and go around and hear about, what has this project meant to you? How did it come together? What do we need to know most about the issues that you've encountered?
Well, thanks very much, and thanks everybody for showing up on a Friday night. I mean, that's what's most remarkable to me. Interesting topic, and this process of pulling this report together involving so many different authors. There are many stories involved in that, including a very cold boat ride around Manhattan. But
for bonding.
For bonding purposes. It got all the authors much tighter and more committed to the project. But I took a very active role in the energy chapter. And the one thing that continues to fascinate me about that is how what we must understand as we look towards the future is that we're dealing with the consequences of decisions made over 100 years ago. And trying to reconcile those two facts is, for me, one of the most interesting things about climate change. In 1888, there was a really big snowstorm in New York City. And that brought down all the telephone wires and all the power wires that were across the city. And that led to the undergrounding of the electric system in Manhattan and in some other neighborhoods around the city. That became an important fact in August when Hurricane Irene showed up in New York City. And one of the key issues that Con Ed was having to deal with was trying to assess whether the sea level was going to rise to a sufficient level that they were going to have to shut off power in lower Manhattan because of those underground wires and those underground transformers. That's a story that is fairly commonplace in the energy system because you're often dealing with climate extremes. The system has to operate well, operate reliably on cold days and on very hot days. But we're now entering an era and we're looking at projections where these extremes become even more significant. And understanding what that means in terms of the reliability of the system, how much we're going to have to pay to prepare that system for those consequences, how much we might end up paying for the power that we use, for other resources that we will consume. Those are the types of things that the research community is trying to help those who are responsible for managing these systems and government officials come to grips with. And the thing that was so remarkable to me was how little data there was about any of this, and how there continues to be very little planning activity underway in the energy sector to look at these long-term climate impacts and how that will potentially affect the infrastructure that we have, how it will affect the viability of the cities in which we live. It may not be the storm or the sea level rise or the heat wave that leads to the downfall of the city. It will be the fact that those impacts will have economic consequences. If the system is seen as unreliable, businesses will leave. The economy of the city will suffer. And then we begin a death spiral. So trying to keep basic infrastructure systems in service at a price that we can afford to pay is going to be one of the principal challenges that energy planners, utility officials, us consumers are going to have to understand as we look towards the future. And what I think is important about this book, and what I think we have heard in terms of the feedback we've received from many public officials, is that they've never seen any of this information put together in one place like we managed to do, thanks to the 100+ authors who we had involved in this. So it was quite an undertaking, but an important undertaking, and I think the beginning of what we hope will be a very long-term effort to keep adding to this set of information, set of ideas, and hopefully policymakers will begin to consume it in a meaningful way.
Well, first, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here because I've had such a spectacular welcome that it was absolutely unimaginable. I've had some fantastic conversations across schools here, and I'm very grateful to all the leadership for receiving me so warmly. But most importantly, I just want to point out two things in the audience. It's of course Friday night, and I've been asking all my students who have shown up today that, you hear this in class, what are you doing here today? So they are here ready to meet you guys. They see me every week. I just want you to raise your hands if you are here, so you can, thank you very much for showing up. I also want to point out that in the audience that we have a strong representation of several people who have been working on this. Steve mentioned 100-odd contributors, but we have David, we have Ray. Can you please stand up so we can give you a round of applause? And Reggie, and Somaya, and Dan Bader, and we just want to know that, we just want you to know that this is, thank you so much for being here. Last time I think the four of us were together in a public meeting was when the outline was done, and Cynthia had the great idea of sending everyone on a boat ride.
Bill.
Bill.
It's Bill's idea.
Bill comes up with the fun ideas.
The circle line.
Circle line.
And so we are very happy to be here together, and that we have really had a spectacular 3 years of engagement with the global community that works on climate change, and we sit in a unique position that addresses the needs of the cities, primarily because that's where all the action is. We are also very grateful. It's not a coincidence that this is happening in New York, that New York is one of the world's front runners on this issue, and we are absolutely grateful to the mayor of the city and his staff that have supported the process in a variety of ways. Having said that, not every city has NASA scientists and MIT professors and lead institutions like CUNY and the New School that can convene this kind of expertise to inform the enlightened administration. There are places like Lagos where there are equally active scientists, but the challenges are dramatic. And I point to Lagos as as a city that has taught us how rapidly urbanization can occur. You know, this weekend or towards the end of this month, we see the world population head to 7 billion. And it is a special moment because half the world is urban, but also rapid urbanization is happening in the global south. We're going to see another 3 billion people added to cities of the world, and these are not going to be in locales like Manhattan. If Manhattan has energy challenges based on decisions that were made in the 1800s, the developing country context, we are seeing $40 trillion being spent in infrastructure over the next 20 years. At least half of that is in the developing country context, where it's entirely a stock issue. Unlike the rest of the world, which is urbanized, in the developing country context, urbanizations are occurring today, and that investment is happening now, and that's happening at unprecedented scales. We find, much to our shock and horror, that even though the science is out there and it is evolving, we are learning a lot more by the day and by the hour, that there isn't a direct linkage between that large investment and climate change. Climate was taken as a constant for cities. It has changed and is changing, and therefore is no longer taken for granted, but that linkage between all our engineering design, all the large investment that is happening in infrastructure is yet to happen. In some geographies it is happening, in others it's not. A city like Lagos receives 500,000 people every year. It has a fraction of the budget of New York City and has 70% of its population in slums. And so the outcomes are dramatically different by cities. That is also true within cities. There are the rich and poor population, large and small firms. And as we saw Irene response in the city, if you go and map the real estate value in the red zones, which were asked to be evacuated first, we see that in the last 10 years, property values have jumped 40, 50%. So there's also a connection to be made between risk and actual investment that is happening across cities. On another note, I just want to point that we hope that this is just the beginning, and I firmly believe that if we can bring 4 or 5 professors who can work together, we can shake the world. And this is living proof. There's my experience, which I share. I am new to the business of responding to large-scale global challenges. I mostly look at simple things like the world's largest slums, which I think can be fixed fairly quickly. We know we have 30 years of tradition. A lot of that leadership actually has migrated for some reason to New York, some of it very much here at the New School, on how to respond to urban challenges and on the infrastructure front. But I hope that you leave this room being optimistic on the capability of what we can do as a collective, at least at the city front. Thank you.
I want to carry on a little bit on some of the themes that both Steve and Shagun have brought forward. I think that when we started out, I think we had an inkling that cities were up to something really important with climate change. I don't think we quite realized actually how transformative the response of cities to a changing climate actually is. And I think as we went through the process, that realization really grew and grew so that it is now much more fully fledged that cities are emerging as having a special role in climate change, that they are actually emerging as the first responders, as opposed to, in contrast to, the nation states that have been working on negotiating a global treaty around climate change for these now 20 years, and basically have not been able to come to an agreement. Shagun and I, as part of our global tour of cities and around the world to meetings of the city leaders themselves, were in Mexico City when city leaders from many, there are now over 190 city leaders and cities who have voluntarily agreed to publicly announce targets and timetables of greenhouse gas emissions. They have no trouble in setting targets and timetables. These are the very arguments that the Kyoto process, the UN framework process, is absolutely stymied on. So I think that there are some very interesting reasons, and I think this is also something that has deepened through the years as we've been working on ARC3, that why that is the case. Because cities, first of all, they have environmental issues that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Urban heat island already, poor air quality already, poor water quality already. They're used to dealing with disasters. You know, think about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, right? The city leaders, for good or ill, were there every day. What about the national leaders? What do? They helicopter in and say, hi, how are you doing? And yes, you know, and then they helicopter out. The city leaders are the ones who are on the front lines in climate-related disasters. So they have an inkling already. They know that when we scientists tell them that climate extremes are already getting worse and are projected to get even worse, more frequent, more intense, that they understand what it means. Shagun mentioned the vulnerability of the people too. No one who lives in a city could believe that everyone is uniformly vulnerable across the city. And so all cities just have that in their lifeblood of the spectrum of socioeconomic groups that have differential vulnerabilities. And then finally, there's something about the level of governance and thinking about the joining of the physical science and the policy aspects, that, you know, city leaders, you know, like Mayor Bloomberg goes to work on the subway, you know, even though, of course, he's jetting off to Bermuda, I guess, on the weekends. But however, he also, you know, you can't escape your citizens. The level of governance seems to be the right level to tackle both reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as, and there's so much on the city planning, the wonderful chapter chapters Steve on energy, Shagun on transportation, and Ray Zimmerman, who's here in the audience, worked on the transportation as well. It's just, they're practical, and so the level of governance seems to be the right match. Also, the citizens of cities depend on government, right, for provision of clean water, for provision of air, for managing things, right? So they don't have this big disconnect of, oh no, we don't want the government being involved, right? Because they're used to what governments actually can do and do well, which is help to manage these things. So those are some of, I guess, my thoughts of all that these are sort of really the things that have strengthened as we've gone through the process. I hope John gives us maybe just a little bit of time at the end after Bill goes to just say new topics, and maybe we want to throw it open to the audience as well on that. But you know, I just one heads up on that. We don't have a design chapter in ARC3, but I'm looking at Joel Towers, and we want to have a design chapter in ARC3 2.0.
Thanks. You know, you guys are pretty good off the cuff, I tell you. I don't know what to say, what to add. But first of all, I guess what I'd like to say is a few words about the process and about this as a creative process and sort of some of the larger issues. I think it's already been framed pretty well that it's an interesting time that we live in. There's at least several sort of large-scale things going on globally. Climate change is certainly one of them. We see increasing evidence of that. And the other one is this issue of urbanization. And so these are two sort of global-scale conditions, global-scale processes that are sort of playing out. And the intersection of them is probably, you know, somewhere in the intersection is going to be some real key lessons to issues of global sustainability. You know, how we sort of build cities, how the decisions that we make today. You know, we talk about the 3 billion additional people that are expected in the world by 2050. And if you use the examples of New York and other places like that, it's actually, you know, you have to kind of backdate the legacy effects of decisions that you make decades before influence where you could be, you know, decades on. So literally it's these moments, it's these times right now, these years, these months, these days, that become really important sort of opportunities for affecting the future. And sort of kind of with that, we, sort of a larger discussion about, what individuals can do. I mean, we sort of sit in a room here and we sort of think, climate change is a sort of process, unfolding. It's huge. It's very powerful, and there are agents certainly involved. I mean, the cities, I would very much argue, are sort of that sort of those first responders. In many ways, they're at the front lines. I mean, New York City, besides Miami, is the most at-risk city to storm surge and large-scale flooding. We just saw that, obviously, the implications of that with Hurricane Irene. So we're in this moment of trying to sort of figure out what to do, and I think one of the things that we individually and sort of collectively as a group were sort of discussing this question about, like, how can we contribute to this sort of larger question? And I think part of that then was sort of trying to sort of take stock of where we could connect with the issue, and I think many of you are probably in that same position, trying to figure out what to do. And I guess I would just, so as a little foreshadowing of how I'll end this couple of minutes, is that, whatever that thing is in the back of your mind that you think is a good idea, try to push it forward and to affect some sort of change. And so one of the things that we sort of recognized, several years back is that, well, there are lots of these sort of emerging international studies on cities and urbanization. This is not just, didn't just emerge in, October of 2011. People have been talking about the growth of cities for a while. And so there's the World Bank is doing studies, and the UN is doing studies, and other international organizations. And then there's lots of all these researchers in all these different cities throughout the world who are really invested in their place and kind of interested in what's going on. And then there's certainly city officials who they're working with and connecting with. And sometimes they're actually folks inside agencies themselves. And so one of the things that I think sort of came out of the design of the ARC3 process and the larger envelope which kind of stretches across it, which is the Urban Climate Change Research Network, UCCRN, is this idea of how to create an opportunity to link all these folks together in sort of a horizontal network, such that there is sort of a more of a kind of a leveling of the playing field, where it's not just sort of these top-down sort of large international organizations presenting these assessments and sort of leaving them at the doorsteps of cities, and it's not just individual cities acting of themselves, in some cases with real limited capacities like Lagos, but really connecting them together in a kind of a global web. And I think that's really the essence, and that's sort of, for me, we a few moments ago talked about reflections. That's sort of, again, the singular reflection for me about how this process contributes to creating that informal horizontal network of people throughout the globe sort of striving with similar aspirations to affect change, particularly in this case with global impacts, global climate change impacts on cities. And so that kind of legacy, as it's sort of embedded in a document of 100 authors, but really connecting, each of those authors are connected to dozens of people in the individual places in which they work, so it becomes a much larger network. And the idea for moving the future is to sort of extend that network, deepen it, and connect more of those pieces together so individuals within cities can affect even more change. So that's sort of some reflections.
Thanks to all of you. I'm very much impressed by the kinds of linkages that also are explored in the book, taking an issue like rising sea levels and examining its impact on the need in many settings for increased pumping capacity, which then in turn causes the need for increased energy production and transmission, which then has another set of impacts. And so connecting the dots in that sense is certainly one of the things that comes across to me in the book. Cynthia, maybe you can tell us a bit about the Urban Climate Change Research Network that was established, speaking of connections, and where things are going in the future. And then we'll go around and hear from each of you about those future directions, and then we'll turn to the audience for questions.
Yes, actually, that was the first thing that happened when the C40, Large Cities Climate Summit, which is the association of the cities themselves and the city leaders themselves and mayors, not only of the largest cities, many of the large cities, but it's a range of city sizes. Mayor Bloomberg hosted that group in 2007, right? And so we, at that time, so there was a lot of discussion there, and it was structured around public-private partnerships, which was great. But there, we said, well, what else do great cities have in common, right? They all have great universities and colleges and institutions of higher learning. And so we invited representatives from universities in the C40 cities to all get together up at the Earth Institute at Columbia. And at that, and then also, we all go to workshops, lots and lots of them, but we said, well, we want something to come out of this one. What could come out of it? So Bill came up with the idea of the horizontal network that he just described in his remarks. And so at that workshop, we founded UCCRN, which is open to everyone. Go to the website, uccrn.org. Samaya Ali, who's standing in the back of the room, is the program manager for UCCRN. And so then we said, well, you know what? We're all on a lot of networks, and we all get these listservs. What makes it actually real that, to actualize a network functioning together? It's to do something together. So at that same meeting, that was when we said, let's form the network and let's work together on an assessment. And that is what is embodied now in the book. But from the beginning, we had one further thought, and then I'll turn it over to ideas from the other editors, my co-editors on some specific ways of going forward. But from the beginning, the process that Bill described was conceived and continues to be conceived as an ongoing one. Because with climate change, there have now been probably thousands, right? I'm looking at David Major, who's worked on many of them, our wonderful, one of the convening lead authors for our water chapter, sitting right here in the front row. There have now been thousands of sort of one-off climate change studies and reports, right? But what's really needed now, as we move into the decision-making phase, the actual development of policies, the actual development of and implementation of them, is an ongoing process, so that we can learn, benchmark, do more, learn more, and then but not have to recreate it every single time. That we can then go back and say, this was our benchmark with ARC3 that came out in 2011, and we hope quick, several, 2, 3 more years, who knows, in a couple of more years, let's do another one that can build on it, so we don't have to always start afresh and have that ongoing learning process. So that's, I would say, is the overarching, an overarching goal of the process that started with this one.
I think this notion of continuous learning is critically important. I have a bookshelf full of best practice books that tell cities what they should do differently, what they can do in 40 different areas of the city. There are NGOs, civil society organizations, that have been established around the world, the C40 being one, that promote extensive information sharing among practitioners. The one thing that you tend to get less of in those kinds of best practice guides in the information sharing sessions between government officials is the assessment of where it went wrong and which ideas were complete failures. And that is why there is really, I think, a very important role for the academic community, the research community, to help play the honest broker in some regard, to make sure that we do have the information presented in a way that does not always put a shiny gloss on any old idea and call it a best practice. We need to critically evaluate what works, what doesn't, how when you contextualize those ideas to individual political, geographic, market, or regulatory contexts in some cases, that some ideas may work better than others. And so I think that that is something that that we can bring to the policy-making table that you will tend to get less of when you get a bunch of mayors or government officials who work on these topics day in, day out to share ideas with each other.
Bill, would you like to jump in on that?
Well, you know, in terms of next steps, I mean, certainly the idea of, oh, sorry. Get in front of the mic. You know, the idea of trying to bring knowledge and information more rapidly to bear on research questions, or sorry, on policy questions. I think one of the things that, you know, we're living in an absolutely fascinating time again. Got a lot more information about a lot of things. It's also in some cases coming to us in a much more sort of real-time fashion. I mean, the world, the cities are becoming increasingly instrumented. We know we have the annual updates about the size of the Arctic ice cap and how much it's, you know, what new record it broke in terms of its decrease in size. And so with that becomes a tremendous challenge for the scientific community to try to figure out how to bring this information together in a coherent fashion and to sort of bring it out to a policy audience, and also to sort of understand what kinds of elements of that information is most important to the decision makers and the stakeholders. I mean, this is an issue that's certainly been discussed and debated for at least several decades, if not more, but the idea of the science policy linkage. But I think that, you know, given the immediacy of the issues, that the timing that we need to sort of think about, the volume of information, the enormity of the number of studies that are being done, the challenge of sort of organizing this information in a coherent fashion becomes a huge part of it, a part of the sort of the future and sort of a next step for, I would think, for an ARC3 initiative to try to how to, you know, look at this issue once again. We took a stab at sort of gathering a wide diversity of information, putting it together in a coherent fashion with an eye toward utility for a decision-making and stakeholder audience, as well as sort of a broader academic audience. But I think the challenge for us is to take in more information and to make it even more targeted and more precise and more useful. So that's, I think, a discussion that we've yet to have, but I think that's where we're going.
I think, you know, when we set out, we were doing the assessment, but I came from a hard policy background, and my sense was that I worked for the World Bank before, which does large-scale interventions across developing country contexts, does analytical work, but does associated investments. And on that note, I want to just point out that we have a host of supporters. The World Bank has supported this in a variety of ways, the Cities Alliance, USGS, you know, each one of our institutions has supported this, NASA GIS, CUNY, and now MIT, before Columbia, likewise. And we've received support from an enormous spectrum of institutions that we have to, which has been piecemeal, and because of the nature of our effort, that it wasn't very clear when we started how this will evolve. Looking forward, one critical issue for us is to institutionalize this process, and for that, we need to think through between ourselves, but we are also looking at the broader audience to which this was pegged, the cities, as to what is the right time frame to update this, because like Cynthia pointed out, this is an ongoing process. So when should the next ARC3-2 come out, and what should it focus on? And there are a variety of efforts: urban agriculture, urban ecology, design, and we hopefully will hear from you other issues that we should be looking at in the next assessment. So there's one about where, you know, what time frame, what structure for next time round. But I think one thing that was invaluable in the first round was that we actually did ask cities, what are they doing? What would they need to do their tasks better? And on that front, our responses squarely addressed what the cities were looking for. we also, along with the global knowledge assessment, were engaged in, and more so in New York, in detailed risk assessments and informing city choices. Some of that needs to be done in more cities around the world. In our class in EPSM on the Climate Change in Cities class, the students are applying this in cities around the world. Hopefully in this room, with Radhika's permission, we may be able to have the students present what they have done over the semester. But that kind of deeper thinking on what cities are doing and how climate science can be integrated in their ongoing and planned investments, choices, methods, policies, and a variety of instruments that cities deploy every day in the everyday life of policy making and interventions. There is tremendous scope for deeper engagement between knowledge as it's being assessed and policy as it is being produced. And even though this happens concurrently in geographies, that linkage is not fostered as often as it needs to. And in that direction, there are many, many opportunities. Another is to really see the dramatic difference between stock versus flow issues. And I say this in the context of how cities are mature and relatively stable in population, in some cases declining in population in the developed country context. And in the developing country context is a dramatically different story. There is virtually no major city in the developing country context that's losing population. It's rapidly growing. If New York is going to receive in 10 years 1 million people, some cities are receiving that in a fraction of that time. And there, these long-term 100-year choices are happening now. And really trying to have the next generation of policymakers as they come to academia to get trained on these issues need to take on some of these challenges head on as they graduate. And there is great hope for all our students who are sort of self-selecting into addressing this global issue. Thank you.
We'll take questions right here in the front.
Well, thank you. This has been very interesting, and I look forward to reading the book. I've got 3 questions. One is, what worries me is what sounds like, and I hope I'll be corrected, the anthropocentric approach, because it seems to me that one of the problems with climate change is trophic cascades and threshold collapse for natural resource systems, including wetlands, for example. So that's one question about how you guys address this. Second question is that in terms of time, it seems like we're dealing with a geometric increase of complexity in the problems, often beyond what we can predict even with modeling. So I wonder what you have to say about that. And the third is what I'm always aware of in these kinds of conversations, the lack of participation of artists. I'm an ecological artist myself, and I'm not talking about design, and I'm not talking about pictures. I'm talking about looking at paradigms differently, because I think that science very often has problems. For example, the idea of neutrality is not necessarily real. So I wonder what you have to say about those 3 things.
So if I understood the question, one is the anthropocentric emphasis. Would someone like to take that on first?
Sure, absolutely. We feel that too. I think that the volume somewhat suffers in that regard, and we absolutely want to go forward. And I have the list of new topics, and as Shagun mentioned, urban ecology, absolutely. And we are we very much want to recruit urban ecologists to create a chapter that really then, not only in one chapter, but to have a chapter of it. And then I think in the templates, because in the templates of the other chapters, to get that absolutely through as well. So thank you for bringing it up forward. We feel the same way.
And then the second question was in respect to the timeline. Time is short. What do we need to do?
the complexity.
Yeah. I guess I can handle. I'll try to. Does anyone want to go for
You
complexity?
go for that one.
But certainly, I mean, you raise a set of good points in terms of the understanding of the systems that we're dealing with and how, I mean, the models that we have are all limited. I mean, they're all sort of abstractions of whatever a complex reality the world is. And so these are always limitations of our ability to kind of resolve understanding and through that sort of communicate that to others. And so I think it's inherent in the business, so to speak. I think the crucial challenge is in this sort of enterprise is to be more, to be as reflexive as possible in terms of understanding those limitations, to understand how they could influence, limitations in the model, whether it's climate models or we're taking sort of other sort of risk-based models or other sort of probabilistic statements or all the other kinds of things, or even economic models of potential cost impacts and so forth, that even within that there's going to be a certain amount of error, and that to translate that information, I mean, it's the model and other sort of associated regimes become a language, of discourse and exchange, and that you have to be able to illustrate that to whoever your audience is, that this is how I'm limited, this is how much I can stretch, this is where it becomes a little bit difficult to extend the argument. So I mean, the science process is inherently gray. Of course, the policy community want black and white. The engineers want the number, as to what they should build for. So it is that challenge that we're always in, and so I agree. I mean, it's inherent in the process, and I think it's the scientists' responsibility to always make sure that that's clear.
And so, segue to the third question, I think through the lens of an artist or through other perspectives, is there the possibility of a paradigm shift?
I thought there was just one question, and I'll tell you from my understanding some choices got made by the philosophers very early on. If you go back to Aristotle, there's a classification of living and non-living, and we have God on top, but right below that is man. And so, we have a pyramid up there where we have, and that's a hierarchy which is random. It's really our construct. There's no reason that we should think we, for any reason, ought to be sitting up there. But really, that anthropocentric view is all pervasive in all intellectual endeavor. And this gets crystallized, and several philosophers study this, but this gets crystallized at the period of the Industrial Revolution. In the 1750s, there's a concerted effort between the Newtonian orthodoxy, the clergy, and the mercantilists to redefine nature as resource, and prior to that, we see nature as habitat. And so, an empathetic view to nature gets discarded for nature as brute and nature as resource, and linked to our well-being, which is through industrial processes, but wealth accumulation. And that we have never turned back from there. And so really artists are in that sense the only hope, where we have like this emotional connect to substantive things. And if you see, the image of the panda draws as much human response as one would generate from any large body of analytical work. And so there, the anthropocentric view comes from not just climate per se, it's a deeper societal choice. Reversal of that, I am afraid, is not coming anytime soon. Or so it seems from all our scholarly endeavors. And associated with the centricity of human enterprise there is bounded rationality. We know that our cognitive abilities are limited, and that's true for climate science projections, but that's true for everyday economic choices. Really, I'm asked every time that when there is climate skepticism, these models are what the coastal scientists do. I ask really every day, trillion-dollar choices that are being made in the economic front are being made on economic models that routinely in the very short term tell us that they are not great predictors of reality. However, we rely on these because these are the best mechanisms by which policy is induced. And so on the climate front, and there I look at the ones who generate them, and also in the back row there, that we very much trust your enterprise and your rigor as much as any other enterprise. And more so because they tend to lay out the uncertainty in very open terms, and therefore also make the science vulnerable to criticism. But they give you probabilistic scenarios. We don't say 2% growth rate next quarter. They say, okay, maybe a degree or two rise in temperature down in 2050s. And with what degree of surety? So I don't know if that addresses your question.
By the way, it's very nice to be holding this panel in the gallery with the art around.
Absolutely, and so we're surrounded by the responses of artists to climate change, if you haven't had a chance to view the gallery. Question here.
Thank you. Can you repeat it, John, when you get the question, just for the... Sure.
I absolutely applaud the city focus that lies at the heart of your enterprise, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book. And I agree with the speakers who see, all of you clearly see cities as the pacemakers, the cities as the locusts, the cities as also the canaries in the coal mine. But in thinking about, for each of you, who you, as you were writing and as you were working, who you see as the most critical audiences for your work, whether it's the 1.0 version or the 2.0 or the 3.0 version. You spoke about your fellow academic community, you talked about cities in terms of city government, but the enterprise that you set out is going to be an enterprise that will call upon and sometimes stress many different entities or institutions within cities, and who else or what other audiences in cities should be reading this book?
So the question is, who's your ideal reader? To whom do you want to direct this message?
Yes.
And what should they do after they read it?
Thanks. Everyone should read the book. There should be television shows based on the book. It's a great question, Nancy, and I think that when we originally conceptualized UCCRN, it was as a counterpart to the politicians in the room. It was the notion that, this entire enterprise, if you want some backstory, came out of me meeting Cynthia in London in 2005 when we were at the first C20 meeting. And we cornered a New York City official and said, you should host the next one. And it happened. But it also became very clear that the conversation was one-sided. It was politician talking to politician. It was policymaker talking to policymaker. And that there wasn't as much, I don't want to say that there wasn't facts being shared in the room, but a lot of the policymaking was not fact-based. And so this was an attempt to try and bring as much evidence as was available in the academic literature and in the gray literature to bear in one place, so that people who had an appetite for doing things better, for learning from lessons from afar and not just within their network, could draw on that resource. Now, we have clearly, and again, this thing was pulled together. We thank our funders for all that they did, but this thing has lived on a shoestring for several years. And it has been through the generosity of time of the authors and through some of my colleagues up here at the front table that we have collectively manage to go to, I don't know how many different events, and try and just talk about this and talk about the need for fact-based, fact-supported policymaking. And we think it's beginning to resonate. It's a whole lot easier when you can walk around and have a book in your hand and say, here. And so I think that there will be an appetite among the political community, among the policy community for this now that we have a tangible product that we can really share with them. But I certainly hope that those who must live with the consequences of any of these decisions also begin to inform themselves in a meaningful way about what the facts tell us and how different places are approaching this, different cities around the world, and that there are lessons to be drawn from that so that you, the citizen, you, the person who must live with the consequences of decisions being made today, investments being made today, that you have to live with those consequences from now for the next 20, 30, 50, 70 years, that we should all begin to take this on and begin to educate ourselves about this type of information. Those of us who live in and love cities should certainly want to consume this information because the cities in which we live are going to be profoundly affected by climate change.
We're running a little short on time, so we're going to take, say, 3 questions, and we'll go all the way to the back first, and then in the middle, and then right here in the front.
Already throughout the country, that we're already building in 2 or 3 feet of storm surge, sea level rise, and that we need to take measures now individually and also collectively. So how can we translate this into a public education campaign?
Okay. Well, let's just take the one, and then we'll go to the, there was someone in the middle here? Yes. Yes, your question?
My question was, what is, in your view, something that the common person can do to influence climate change?
Okay, thank you. And third question in this series?
Well, I think it turned around a little bit, but I run an organization that looks at practices, looks at what will work on the ground, and in this very city, as part of our work looking at the role of waste that we throw away and turning it into fuel by using methane gases in it, that we are exporting enough waste from this city now, which cares so much about climate change, to out-of-state landfills, to create easily from that waste enough fuel to power all of our refuse trucks, all of our transit buses, and all of our taxis. Now, every city in the country could be doing this. Waste, organic waste, whether it's agricultural, whether it's dairy, whether it's sewage treatment plant, whether it's landfill, is an enormous resource, and it's also a resource that, if not used, is generating vast amounts of methane gas as a climate change gas.
And so to pose a question in relation to that?
The question is, what can this kind of realization that this can in fact be happening, how does this relate to your ability to discuss policy trends, the overall numbers, how it could happen? Because this is one of the giant transitions from the 1880s, from petroleum to another way. How can, or does it not, how does the way in which you're looking at these things enable you to take a particular problem like that, or I would call it a particular solution, and do something with it in the context of policy, what can be done about it?
Okay. Well, let's try to take those 3. And so I think the first 2 are kind of connected. How can we translate for the public? Secondly, how can citizens respond? And third, what are some policy initiatives that can address some antiquated technologies?
Can you do public info?
Sure. Actually, and I'm going to have a little caveat. I'm going to have to actually slip away after I respond. I have to sort of pressing thing. I need to go catch a train, among other things I got to go do. So I'm very sorry about that. But this has been a great forum, and it actually has spurred a lot of thoughts in my mind. I think one of the things in terms of public information and the like, I think and this might not be a fully satisfying answer, satisfactory answer, or satisfying, is that, this particular work, I always see this sort of ways of sort of presenting a little piece of the puzzle, like one small step, and that it provides a lot of information, and that I think that it certainly can become, so as individuals here, our task, our role has really been to sort of help to sort of put together this network and sort of bring forth a statement that provides a lot of really rich information about climate change. I think the challenge is to sort of how to take that information and sort of bring it out to various audiences. Some of this was scripted specifically toward a set of decision makers and stakeholders, who are involved in the operations of everyday experiences of cities. And it wasn't really tailored, although or explicitly tailored to the household or to the other units of decision making that take place in cities. And so I think one of the challenges for any kind of work just like this is to how to make that translation. I'm not an expert to do that, but I think the way it could be done is to have folks who are involved in that process, whether it's sort of within the NGO or the education community, to take documents like this and sort of translate that into sort of everyday experience and practice. And in terms of what individuals can do, again, a little bit of a cop-out, but really to become engaged and involved in the issues that are pressing and important to you, and sort of and really beyond just the everyday casual you, but to sort of take action in a way that you think is appropriate. That's really all we have as individuals, but then to figure out mechanisms to connect with others, and that becomes more possible in the current era, is the vehicle to look toward the future.
Great. I'll just take a little bit, at least offer one thought about the sort of the role of, and how we in the UCCRN and ARC3 process handle the transformational technologies, for example. Throughout the book, there are, I think it's about 50 case studies of what actual cities are doing, trying, what's working, what's not working. Some of them are on barriers. Some of them are saying, this is just so hard. This like the finance across the multiple jurisdictions are really hard. Some of them are on new technologies and what's working. So as we go forward, and that was in direct response to what the city decision makers asked for in the survey that Shagun was telling about. They said, tell us what cities are doing and working, and what's working, what's not working. So as we go forward, we would invite you to then, and the case studies are named authors. So we're not taking them away. It's actually then we could we could share the experience of your great work that you're doing on particular technologies that say this is what's working. So that's one answer to that part.
But if I could just add one point to that the process of developing this publication involved, a peer review, and let me just say that peers didn't always agree with some of the things that were first written.
They never do.
And so the argument that you so passionately make may well be countered by an equally passionate reviewer. And that is part of the dynamic of the development of this kind of publication, which is let's really try and get at what the facts say. Let's try and get at what the dilemmas are, because the technologies that you're referring to may be profoundly expensive for many cities, and at a scale that is beyond the capacity of many governments to afford. And so you end up in a situation where the ideal solution cannot be pursued, so maybe there is a different hierarchy that should be investigated. And those are the kinds of things that we try and bring out in this kind of publication. Did we cover every single topic exhaustively? No, and that's why there will be a 2.0 and a 3.0, because there will always be, well, hopefully, if someone's got a checkbook, we're looking for some help for 2.0. you know, there are lots of questions that remain, and as time goes on, more and more facts will become available, and then we will begin to answer some of these questions that we couldn't tackle today.
Shagun gets the last word.
Home team.
Well, the first thing that everybody can do is enroll in EPSM and take our class, because here you get the textbook every week incrementally, and you can debate it, exercises that use it, and hopefully as you graduate you can help change the world. But I just want to say for every individual, as much as, before I continue, I just want to point out that Maria is here. I think Joe Gilbride has come. Two star individuals. Is Richard here? Richard is also here.
Back there.
Yes.
Oops.
So more authors and
More
more
authors
key
and
people
contributors.
have come who really worked on it, made it possible.
So please raise your hands so that everyone can see you. Thank you. Joe has come all the way from Washington, D.C. and has been instrumental in keeping us honest and on time.
And organized the
and
reviewers.
The three-tier review process. But just that as every individual can contribute, every variable counts. And by what I mean by every variable counts is that there is in every detail. Is that Lily? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh God, sorry Lily, but there's Lily. One more before we close up. But every variable counts, and therefore every individual in routine, everyday choices can make a dramatic difference. And the fact that each one of you are asking or are taking time out to come in here to reflect on this is a dramatic indicator of that. So thank you very much for your interest and participation.
Thank you all. Thanks very much for coming. Please join us. Buy a book.
If I can just make sure that all of you are aware that next Wednesday in the gallery we have a talk that deals with climate change in the context of art, activism, and research, so that it may not have to wait till 6.0 to get into the next edition of the book.
Thanks.